Many, many times people have said to me, well, if there were evidence for it, it would be published. And of course what they mean is published in the acceptable medical literature. But what they don't recognize is that the medical literature only publishes that kind of material which is consistent with its philosophy. So if something is submitted which is too far out of their way of belief, no matter how good it is, it will not be published. And this is true not just in medicine, it happens in other fields too. Well, there's a particularly well-known television and radio, I guess, medical doctor who does a program. And I've heard him sometimes say, well, I've looked into that, and I can find nothing in literature to support da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, maybe he did look into it, and he probably didn't find anything to support it, but then which literature did he look in? If it's the orthodox medical literature, because it's not there, doesn't mean it isn't true. And that's most unfortunate.
I became involved in the health issue mainly because of a close friend of mine. Dr. John Richardson was an MD who practiced general medicine up in the San Francisco area. And one day he told me that he was having trouble with the medical authorities because he was using a substance in the treatment of cancer which was not approved by the AMA or the FDA in this case. And even though he was having marvelous results with it, better results than anything he had ever tried in his practice, they had told him in effect, stop using it or you're going to lose your license. And he had a terrible dilemma because his Hippocratic oath was to save lives. That was his first obligation. And to preserve his license seemed to be secondary to him. He was a very principled man. So I said to John, I said, well, look, my business is communication, so let me dig into this, give me your papers, give me your notes, and educate me a little bit, and I'll produce a little documentary film, and we'll explain the truth, and then the opposition will go away when they understand what the truth really is. Well, that's how naive I really was. I had no idea how much voltage was in the wire I was about to grab. In this field in particular, the science of cancer therapy wasn't nearly as complicated as the politics of cancer therapy. It wasn't an issue of whether something was effective. It didn't matter whether it worked. It didn't matter whether you were saving lives. The important thing was it approved. Did it go through the political process? And then you find out that the political process is dependent largely upon the economic process. Who's involved? Who's making a buck on this thing? Who's in control of the industry? And wow, I had no idea what I was getting into. I can speak of the American medical profession. It was captured. It was totally captured in 1910 by the pharmaceutical industry. From that point forward, the doctors of America were trained in how to prescribe drugs. Who was paying the bill? The pharmaceutical companies. And so therefore the curricula of the great medical centers where the doctors get their medical training has always been skewed in the direction of drugs and drug therapy. Prior to 1910, the condition of medical excellence, if you want to call it that, medical professionalism in the United States was at a very low level. In those days, it would be possible to get a medical diploma by mail. And just about anybody who really wanted to could hang out the shingle and say, I'm a doctor, and they could treat people. And there was a lot of quackery out there. I might say parenthetically, however, there's a lot of quackery out there today, and some of them have the MD degrees, but nevertheless, let's just take it straight. There was quackery, and this is certainly not anything to be defended. There was a low level of medical knowledge. So everyone knew this, or a lot of people knew it in Congress anyway, and there was a lot of pressure, political pressure for medical reform in America. And but nobody wanted to fund it. Well, it just so happened that the people who were most heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry, people like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, had tax-exempt foundations that were practicing what I call in my book, efficiency in philanthropy. It's not really what I call it. I borrowed that phrase from one of the original designers of philanthropy in those days. His name was Ivy Lee, and then his trade was picked up by a fellow by the name of Fred Gates. And these people were like public relations experts, and they were hired by the tycoons of the period, like Carnegie and George Pillsbury and John D. Rockefeller, to improve their public images. And so people like Ivy Lee and Fred Gates came up with what they called efficiency in philanthropy. And their formula was, all right, here's what you do. You give away large amounts of money. You've got plenty of that. So, if you give away $1 million or $2 million, you hardly notice it. But to the average person, it's a huge donation. So you get a lot of publicity on being a great philanthropist. But don't just give it away with no strings attached to it. Give it away in a certain fashion so that it brings money back to you. And that's what the efficiency formula was all about. And what they would normally do, I'm digressing for a moment here, but it's interesting, I think, this part of the history. They would this was the origin of the matching funds formula. They used to just give away the money, but then Fred Gates said, no, don't just give it away. Give away half of it. Get the community involved. Tell them that you will match dollar for dollar. Every dollar that they can raise from the community, you will put $1 in. Now that way, you still get your name on the top of the library door or the hospital door. It's still your project, and you get all the publicity for it, but you only pay half as much. Not only that, you get the community involved, and they're out there ringing doorbells and doing mailings, and everybody feels that they're part of your project, and they feel that they're your partner, and they have this great feeling of camaraderie with you, and on and on and on. So this was it's a business, you see. Raising money is a business. And this all originated in those days. And so the formula for efficiency in philanthropy was applied to taking over the medical schools. All they had to do was to finance a great study to show how bad medical education was in America, which was easy to do because it was in bad shape. So they hired a fellow by the name of Flexner, Abraham Flexner. And he was working at the time for the Carnegie Foundation. And he traveled around America and got the data together and published what was called the Flexner Report. You'll find this in any of the textbooks of the period about the development of medical education. The Flexner Report said, surprise, medical education was in a low state and needed to be reformed. Well, having then delivered the Flexner Report in the academic community and in the halls of Congress, now the great philanthropists came forward and offered money to reform medical education in America. Demonstrate the need, then offer the solution.